Let's bring Karl Rove, Fox News contributor, served as senior advisor and deputy chief of staff to President George W. Bush. Well, Karl, your reaction, it sounds like Mr. Sondland will not be testifying today because the administration feels that this is not the appropriate venue.
Yeah, well, first of all, full disclosure, Gordon Sondland is a friend of mine. I talked to him last week. He called me for advice on a lawyer, which I gave him. We had no substantive discussion about the exchange of emails or the situation at hand, but I know Gordon, and I know Gordon well. I thought it was very unusual that the House Democrats remember, the original thing is they sent the letter on the 27th saying we want documents and witnesses to begin appearing by the 2nd of October,
right,
which is like 2 working days, 2 business working days. They sent it on a Friday, and they want them to start appearing on Wednesday. So Monday and Tuesday, you're supposed to get all these documents together. These people are supposed to be able to meet with the counsel of the State Department. They're able to look at what they can say and what they can't say. This is just ridiculous. So why the rush to judgment is beyond me.
But Karl, you know why? Because then if you do not produce this stuff in 2 days, they can go, they're withholding evidence. That's obstruction of justice. That is an article of impeachment.
Well, no, it is not an obstruction of justice. If you go back over the history... You go back over the history of our country, there's a tension, an ongoing tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch. The legislative branch makes demands, the executive branch resists, and they then work it out. But there's no interest in working it out. The whole idea of this is let's create headlines and drama right from the beginning, and this ill serves the country. There was a piece last week by Robert Doar. Robert Doar is the president of the American Enterprise Institute, a center-right think tank in Washington, D.C. I had forgotten that his father, John Doar, was the counsel, a Republican lawyer in the Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson Departments of Justice, appointed by the Democrat chairman of the House Judiciary Committee to be the counsel of the impeachment inquiry. And this article laid out all of the things that this backbencher, nondescript backbencher, Peter Rodino, the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee, did to make the impeachment investigation of Richard Nixon as nonpartisan as possible. And all of those things, a vote by the House of Representatives, a joint majority and minority staff, so they met together, rights for the minority to call witnesses and schedule depositions and issue subpoenas. The President's counsel, President Nixon's counsel, was treated as a member of the staff and was in all the private hearings, all the private depositions, all the private discussions, was allowed to recommend witnesses to call, was allowed to question witnesses, was allowed at the end of any hearing, private or public, to state the president's position. And this is why, at the end of the process, both Democrats and Republicans, supporters of President Nixon and opponents of President Nixon, complimented Rodino for having run a proper and unifying committee process. Not so under the group that we've got running this process.
Why then should the administration participate in this inquiry when they don't have those rights? Is this part of a new effort to say we're just not going to participate until you hold that vote to give us the opportunity to have the other side?
Well, I think that you're right. They're going to try and force the House to hold a vote. But I'm not certain they're going to be able to get the House to hold the vote because, you know, it's Nancy Pelosi's decision. And I thought it was hilarious. On Fox News Sunday, Val Demings, a member of the Judiciary Committee, who was on with Chris Wallace, said, well, there is no precedent. Well, wait a minute. We've had 2 impeachments of presidents in the modern era under the rules of the House and Senate as they now exist. And in both instances, Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton, there was a vote of the House to authorize a formal inquiry into the impeachment of the president. So, I mean, the Democrats are standing on a weak leg here, but they're going to hurt themselves. A rush to judgment, a highly partisan investigation, an impeachment on the flimsiest of rationales that they would never apply to another person. There was the circus on Showtime this weekend. Representative Delgado from upstate New York is asked by a constituent at a town hall meeting, what's the law that you say the president broke? Well, I think the president broke the law that said you can't take anything of value from a foreign country or foreign national. Well, the Justice Department has already been heard on that issue. But let's for a moment assume that this was taking something of value. Do you think that these same Democrats would be saying, well, President Hillary Clinton, it now turns out, hired a British secret agent to ask for information from former Russian intelligence agents in Moscow, any dirt they had on Donald Trump for a dossier? Do you think any Democrat would be saying, oh, yeah, we got to remove her from office?
Carl?
Yeah, she violated the law.
We are being told in our ear by the producer that apparently Adam Schiff, who's going to have a press conference in 50 minutes, he's trying to draft a subpoena to compel your friend, Mr. Sondland, to show up later today.
Well, again, this is stunts. If you want to work this out, you sit down with the State Department and you sit down with Pompeo and you say, look, we understand we can't ask him about his conversations with the president, but we want him to appear and we want to give him reasonable time to prepare. And how can we work this out? But Adam Schiff is only concerned about one thing, which is how big a presence can he have on cable TV and what kind of a hot dog can he look like? I mean, I was taken aback. I was appalled that the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee would begin a hearing by basically, channeling his inner Martin Scorsese and completely making up a phony conversation between the President of the United States and the Ukrainian president and try and pass it off to the cable audience as to what that conversation really was. And, I mean, talk about a stunt. Unworthy of his high position and the great responsibility he has as chairman of the Intelligence Committee and as the lead Democrat in this impeachment inquiry.
Karl, how does this play out? Who has the power? Is it Congress telling him you have to show up, we might subpoena you, you have to talk? Or is it his boss, who is Mike Pompeo, who's saying, no, you're not allowed, Congress, just to come in and talk to my people behind my back. You're not allowed to tell them they're not allowed to have attorneys and then subpoena them and make them talk. Who has the power here?
Well, look, there are lots of these points of conflict, and they'll be resolved by patient negotiation and maybe a resort to the courts. I hope it's done more by patient negotiation than a resort to the courts. Look, the Congress does have the right to ask members of the administration to come forward and talk about certain things. They can't say, now, what did you tell the president and what did the president tell you? But they do have, a right to do this. On the other hand, the State Department has the right to prepare its people for that moment. And it is unreasonable to say, you know what, right now, we want you here right now. Right. You can't go talk to the lawyers. You can't review the notes. You can't go over the whole thing. We want it now. We want it really right now so that we can get you in front of the cameras as quickly as possible. That's not the way the process should work, and it's not the way that it will work, I'm convinced, eventually.
Yeah. Karl, the reason Mr. Sondland was called was because of the
Ambassador Sondland to you, my friend. Ambassador Sondland to you.
Your friend to you. Is because of his, the whole quid pro quo thing and the whistleblower revealed. Now we're hearing that apparently Congress, the Democrats, are trying to keep the whistleblower's identity secret. They might interview him at a remote location. They might obscure his appearance. They might alter his voice. He might be behind a curtain. And the members of Congress themselves might not actually interview him. It might just be the staff.
Well, if they do this and televise it, then this is clearly just a made-for-TV drama. If they were to have, look, we had during the Nixon impeachment and the Clinton impeachment, we had closed hearings where people were interviewed and the committee members were informed by those interviews, but we didn't have it broadcast on TV. If they do this, think about this. They're going to accuse the President of the United States of having committed an act that rises to high crimes and misdemeanors and is worthy of removing him from office, but we're never going to see the face of the individual. We're never going to hear their voice. We're never going to hear them in public testimony. We're never going to be able to make a judgment as to their credit, in essence, their trustworthiness. And not only that, but remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about somebody who is taking second and third-hand information about a transcript that we now can read. We can now read that transcript. We don't need to have somebody say to us, well, I heard about what he said on the phone. Right. We know what he said on the phone.
Karl, we're going to lose you in a moment. Thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you so much,
we appreciate
Karl.
it.
You bet.
We actually have received now a statement from the EU ambassador about the fact that he will not be appearing to testify today. Here's the statement. He said, early this morning, the U.S. Department of State directed Ambassador Gordon Sondland not to appear today for his scheduled transcribed interview before the U.S. House of Representatives Joint Committee. Ambassador Sondland had previously agreed to appear voluntarily today without the need for a subpoena in order to answer the committee's questions on an expedited basis. As the sitting U.S. ambassador to the EU and an employee of the State Department, Ambassador Sondland is required to follow the department's direction. Ambassador Sondland is profoundly disappointed that he will not be able to testify.
Keep in mind, after the conversation with the president of Ukraine, our president had with Ukraine, he was commenting with Bill Taylor. Bill was saying, I can't believe the president did this. And then Sondland said there was no quid pro quo. The president has said that. And he would be the one that would be more favorable for the president to speak today based on those
based on what we've seen in the text messages.
Yes, but Mike Pompeo did say, I'm not going to allow my people to talk so quickly.
Right. In the New York Times story that is just crossed regarding this, they say, I'm going to read one paragraph, but in making the decision on Tuesday, hours before he was scheduled to sit for a deposition in the basement of the Capitol, the Trump administration appears to be making the calculation that it is better off risking the House's ire than letting Mr. Sondland show up and set a precedent for cooperation with an inquiry they have strenuously argued is illegitimate. So in other words, keep in mind, the President of the United States, we heard last week, was drafting a letter to say, unless you vote on this, this is an illegitimate operation, the whole impeachment inquiry thing. Have a vote, get everybody in the House on the record, and then we will cooperate. But they have not done that yet. And so the White House views it as essentially illegitimate.
Bingo. That may answer the question you were asking. Why did the two previous folks appear and not Sondland?
Right.
Well, this is a current member of the administration, which would be a reflection of whether they're willing to cooperate. If they believe it to be an illegitimate investigation, which a lot of people believe it to be, then withhold until they hold the vote.
That's what Mike Pompeo said. They are not. They're telling people who work under me that they need to go and speak. They need to not get lawyers. And he said that's not the process. We need due process.
Although we heard from Karl Rove exclusively that apparently Mr. Sondland did call him and asked for the name of a lawyer.
That's true.
Now
and that was his lawyer that released that statement to us.